terrible nightmares a lot. One reoccurring nightmare is about a shadowy figure standing near my bed. Thankfully hasn't happened in a while, but it always starts out the same. In the dream, I wake up from my sleep and see this shadowy blur in one corner of my room. I then actually wake up in a little bit of a panic, but eventually fall asleep. In the dream, I wake up again. I'm laying in my bed and the shadowy thing is now closer and has formed into the shape of a human. I can never really make out any features, but eventually it's at the foot of my bed just standing there watching me. There's something so menacing about this thing that every time I've had this dream, I've woken up shaking and screaming while struggling to turn my lights on in a confused state. In the dream, I know this thing shouldn't be there and is going to hurt me, but I can never do to stop it. I recently got a puppy, and now when I have nightmares, he moves from his normal spot near my feet and lays next to me while resting his head on my arm and licking my face. This has helped me a lot. I know that this is probably not the type of story you were looking for, but just talking about that nightmare makes me really uneasy. I know this is way late and will probably get buried, but when my grandmother died in a car accident about 6 to 7 years ago, my mom's home phone kept getting calls about 3 to 4 times a week, give or take. But every time we'd pick up these calls, it'd just be some very old jazz-type music, probably from the 40s and 50s, playing softly. This was the same music my grandmother used to always be listening to around the house. I remember being around it all the time. No one would talk, it would just play the music for a couple minutes then disconnect. Was also an unknown number, and these calls only started a couple weeks after she passed and probably went on for a few months then randomly stopped. It weirded us out a lot. The timing for that to happen, and of all the music choices. None for me, but I remember a story a high school teacher told me that always stuck with me. My former teacher was home alone when she was a child, at some point in the 70s probably. A man knocked on her door and she opened her main door but kept her screen door locked. He said he was from the gas company and wanted to talk to her parents. She told him they weren't home and he, without missing a beat, tried to start forcing his way into the home. When he found the screen door to be locked, he pulled out a box cutter and started to cut through the screen. My teacher ran to hide in a clothes hamper in her parents' closet. She said she sat there for about 10 minutes before the police arrived. Thank God a neighbor saw everything and called the police, or she probably would be dead. Also, to put the cherry on the freaking creepy sundae, they found the intruder hiding in the attic. She told us that as a cautionary tale to lock all doors and windows when home alone. Of course, naturally, I would go home from school to be alone for hours. Doom. Me and my friends were driving home from a show we all went to. This was about 7 years ago or so in the Cerritos area. There's an elementary school there, I think on 186th, I forgot what it's called. Anyway, we drove by a local elementary school, all of us joking and laughing, or whatever 16-year-olds do, and my friend's girlfriend looked over at the playground in the school, screamed, and refused to talk to anyone for a few hours. We all asked her what was wrong, what she saw, what happened, but nothing would make her tell us. We all thought she saw someone on the playground or a dead body or something. All we knew was that she was seriously spooked. As backstory, I should add that she's sensitive to paranormal happenings. I should also add that I don't really believe in ghosts or the like, but whatever. She would have doors fly open at her old house, clothes hangers fly off the rail, cups fall over and then right themselves multiple times. Anyway, she eventually told her boyfriend what she had seen. She said that she had briefly seen a bunch of blood-covered people walking around the playground aimlessly. I immediately started blaming exhaustion as it was around 2 a.m. when we drove by. We looked it up later and it turns out that a plane had crashed into the school in the late 80s and a lot of people had died. Spooky music. It was May 1995. I was 8 years old and our second grade class took a field trip to our local hospital. We were getting a tour of the facility when I suddenly left the rest of the class and started making my way down the hallways. Eventually, I ended up in a room where a man in his early 90s was laying in a bed. We talked for about 5 minutes, then I said goodbye and left. I found the rest of the class as they were leaving, and on our way out my grandmother and her sister were walking in. They stopped to talk to me and my grandmother told me my great-grandfather Gene was here in the hospital. I said, "I know, I just spoke to him." They both looked perplexed, because nobody had told me he was in the hospital. He died hours later. I went in there not knowing he was there. Didn't know what room he was in, but I somehow ended up in his room speaking to him just hours before he passed away. We often visited my grandparents' cabin when I was a kid. It's your normal rustic cabin in the middle of the quiet woods. When we left to go home, I would say, "Bye Grandma, bye Grandpa, bye Scary Man." Since there was no one else but my grandparents, it creeped my parents out for years. Years later, they asked me who I was talking to. What it was, the neighbors had an outdoor water heater and it had some scratches and markings on it that resembled a face. I called it Scary Man. I can imagine how creepy that may have been. A few years ago, my wife's uncle, Bob, from Florida was killed in a vehicle accident in Florida on his way to Illinois to visit family for Father's Day. At the time, my oldest daughter was a few days shy of being 3. No one spoke about it in front of her or really acted like anything was out of the ordinary in front of her. About 2 days after Bob died, I heard my daughter in our kitchen talking, and it sounded like she was having a conversation. I walked into the kitchen and, of course, she was alone, but she was talking in the general direction of the dishwasher. I asked her who she was talking to, and she told me Bob says he's not ready to go yet. I asked her who Bob was, and she described my wife's uncle, whom she had never met and had never seen a picture of because we didn't have any. I hope Bob was able to go eventually. So me and my friend Miranda, who is from New Zealand, were at the Reading Terminal Market in Philadelphia, waiting in line to use the bathroom. We were chatting, and the lady in front of us turns around and says something like, "Sorry to interrupt, but I'm also from New Zealand." We had not mentioned anything about NZ in our conversation, but I figured she might have recognized Miranda from her accent. So we chatted for a few minutes, then went back to our own conversations. A few minutes after that, she turns around again and says something like, "God has spoken to me and told me that I must help you with your watermelon problem." Miranda was deathly allergic to watermelon. Again, no mention in our conversation whatsoever about watermelon and or her allergies. Late but whatever. I was about 14 and creepy stuff had been happening in my room. Started with my TV turning off and on at random times of the night. Then it got worse. When I would wake up, there would be dirty handprints around the edge of my ceiling like something was pawing to get out. Then the shadows just moving back and forth around the room. Then the real stuff hit the fan, one night tapping on the walls and scratching in the ceiling. Scared the sh*t out of me, but I still said nothing to my dad. Then it happened and I could not tell anyone. I was just sitting there watching TV in my room, and in the creepiest voice I've ever had, "How are you today?" Like an old lady almost. Packed my things up and ran the fastest I've ever run down my stairs in my life. My brother was downstairs doing whatever when I basically fall down the stairs, physically shaking with him, asking what happened and why I was so freaked out. I told my dad about it, and he came home from work, told us to go see a movie while he worked his magic on my room. Everything was fine for many years until I just heard 3 single taps on my wall a few days ago. A few years ago, I went to a Christmas party. That night, my housemates went home earlier while I decided to stay and get in the Christmas spirit with a few other friends. I ended up getting pretty hammered and got home around 3 a.m. Instead of going straight to bed, I got another beer inside, then went out the back porch to have a smoke and look at the stars. I was outside a couple of minutes when I see the light go on in the kitchen. My housemate comes out and look at me out the back. I wave and generally look like a drunk idiot. I thought he was going to come out and get a debrief on the rest of the evening, as there were some good laughs we had not relevant to the story. Anyway, he just gets a glass of water and goes to bed. I finish my smoke and beer, and so do I. The next morning, we're rehashing the previous night when he mentions getting up and seeing me having a smoke out the back. "Who came back from the party with you last night?" I give him a sideways look and reply, "No one, dude, I was out there alone." He insists, "Nah man, there was someone out there with you, behind you on the porch when you were looking inside waving." I didn't come out cause I thought it was some random friend from the Christmas party I didn't know, couldn't be bothered making introductions. To this day he stands by this version of events. Whoever it was must have been standing close behind me the whole time. I saw no one and heard nothing. Gives me the willies every time I think about it. My grandfather died last year sometime when my son was maybe a year old. We had dinner with the whole family every Friday night, so my son had seen him several times. Empty grandfather was a very quiet, proud man, but when he thought he was alone or unseen, he would make silly faces at my son to get a laugh. A couple nights after his funeral, my son, who liked to crawl into bed with us in the middle of the night, started just laughing uncontrollably at like 2 a.m. So I get out of bed to see what's going on, and find my son sitting in the middle of the living room, in the dark, laughing. I say, "Hey buddy, what are you doing?" In toddler speak he says, "Papa, funny." I got a little nervous for some reason and went to pick him up and bring him to our room for the rest of the night. And as I'm hauling him away, he says, "Bye, Papa," and blows a kiss at absolutely nothing I can see. I grew up in a religious home. The afterlife was cut and dry as either heaven or hell. So the following scares the CR*P out of my family but gives me a chuckle. They think they know how everything works as opposed to accepting the mysteries of the universe. My brother-in-law was dying of cancer. My dad, a pastor, went to see him on Sunday afternoon. My BIL asked what the church had going on that week. My dad pulls out his pocket calendar and tells him. BIL says, "So Wednesday is free?" It was the only day that week nothing church-related was happening. He died on that Wednesday. Several times over the years since, the phone at the church or the parsonage will ring, but the caller ID is blank. We answer, and it's my BIL's voice asking what the church has going on that week. Back when the PS3 Slim was new, I traded my purple GameCube in, along with my controllers and a memory card and a bunch of other things to help afford buying a PS3 Fat. Several years later, I decided I missed my GameCube and bought a black one off eBay. A week later, I went upstairs to my attic to put an old suitcase away when I saw the box my original GameCube came in. Weird, I thought I'd taken the purple GameCube to the store in that all those years ago. I decided to open it up to see what was inside out of pure curiosity, and my original GameCube was in there, plus the memory card and controllers I sold for my PS3. Just a glitch in the matrix, I guess. My coworker who I have worked with for the past 5 years recently told me a story about his daughter when she was about 2 years old. She had imaginary friends like most kids do. One day they went to Japan to visit his wife's parents. They were at a temple when all of a sudden the girl gets excited, points at the wall and yells, "Grandma." The grandma had died long before she was born. His wife gets confused saying grandma is dead, but the daughter is having none of this. The daughter makes the wife walk into the temple and points at a cupboard and says to open the third cupboard. The wife does this and there is an album of families who used to go to the temple, and the first page has a picture of the grandma. She points at the picture and sure enough it's her grandma. In conclusion, kids are scary. About a couple weeks after I was born, my dad's best friend, Jim, died. They were really close, and one of the last things he wanted was to hold little me before he passed. His wish was filled, and some short time after that he was gone. Fast forward 7 years. I'm now a happy 7-year-old with a 5-year-old brother and recently born sister. One day the phone rings, and with my mom out and dad in the washroom, I thought it was going to be ignored as we kids were still too young to answer the phone. No call display. We didn't know if there would be a stranger. But my brother broke the rules and answered. "Hello?" At this point my dad is out of the washroom and is asking my brother to hand him the phone. He ignores him and keeps listening to whoever is speaking. Before my dad could ask a second time, my brother hangs up, looks at him and says, "Jim says hi and he misses Skywing Nova," then goes back to playing. The look of shock my dad had is what I remember most about this. I used to work at Phillips up near Sleepy Hollow in New York. At my lunch breaks, I like to wander through the forest on the work property. One beautiful October day, I was admiring the autumn leaves when I saw a buck standing in front of me. There's a word, numinous, for feeling in the presence of something spiritual, something unworldly. That's how I felt. I quietly and carefully stepped closer to get a better view. I was able to approach quite close, almost close enough to touch him. At that moment, though, the deer turned and I felt all the hair on my arms rise. The deer's eyes were red and dripping with blood. It must have had some disease that had blinded it, and its blindness allowed me to get so close. In the moment, though, it was terrifying and uncanny. I'm late to the party, but I'll share anyways. When I was a teenager, I was big into skateboarding and building ramps. There was a neighborhood being built behind mine, and I'd go over there on the weekends and get scrap wood and bring it back to my house. You had to go through a little bit of woods and cross a creek to get there. I went one day by myself, and when I crossed the creek and started walking through the woods to the construction site, I could hear a man talking. I stood still to try to hear what he was saying. It was getting louder, as if he was coming through the woods towards me, and I finally heard what he was saying, and he made a little jingle singing, "I'm gonna get you." I couldn't hear any leaves crunching, and I never saw anyone. I ran like hell and was slipping while I was trying to climb up the muddy bank in the creek. I don't believe in ghosts or anything, but that's one thing that's stuck with me that I can't explain. One of my brothers worked security in one of New York City's most upscale hotels. The security desk received a frantic call during one of his night shifts. A guy was calling, all freaked out that his wife was in the bath and was not breathing. My brother and another security guard rushed upstairs to the room. Sure enough, they found a woman in the tub and she was unresponsive. My brother and the other guard got her out of the tub and attempted CPR. In the interim, during resuscitation attempts, the NYPD arrived. They told my brother to stop CPR because the lady was obviously dead and, in their opinion, had been for a couple of hours. The husband was questioned extensively. He told law enforcement that he and his wife had a fight earlier in the evening. He went out on his own, and when he came back, his wife was in the bath. He says he went to bed at that point, but later became concerned when his wife didn't come to bed. Privately, among all those present, the general consensus was that the husband had something to do with it, but it could not be proven. A couple of weeks later, the room was again made available to guests, and of course the incident was not mentioned. A woman who frequently stayed at the hotel made a reservation for a week and was assigned to that room. She was the first person to stay in the room since the incident. She came to the front desk first thing in the morning, very upset and with all of her luggage in tow. She said that she was canceling the rest of her reservation and that she would never be staying in the hotel again. She said that she did not sleep the entire night and that the room was haunted. No one at the hotel had mentioned to her what had previously transpired in the room. While my brother worked there, every guest who stayed in the room called about strange goings-on and many asked to be switched to another room. A few months ago, I had this really scary dream that seemed so real. In my dream, I was in my bed doing something on my laptop. Suddenly, I just had a bad feeling something wasn't right. Like I somehow knew something was in my room with me that shouldn't be there. I jump off my bed and hurry and flip my light on. I flip it on just in time to be this weird black shadow sphere thing with legs zoom under my bed. I woke up scared and crying, but it felt so real and I just knew whatever I saw was very evil. The next day, me and my dad were watching one of those ghost shows like My Ghost Story on TV. In the episode, this woman was in her room and all of a sudden she felt like something wasn't right. She turned her light switch on just in time to see a weird black shadow sphere thing with legs scurry under her bed. It pretty much looked exactly like the thing I saw in my dream. I work in a call center. About 2 weeks ago, I got a man on the phone looking for an address related to the business. The first thing he tells me is that he was born blind, something that went wrong during his birth, but that he was psychic. I proceeded to roll my eyes and went on with the call. We chatted a bit and he talked a bit more about some random things and then he said, "I'm a Gemini." "Are you a Gemini?" Indulging him, I said, "Nope, I'm a Libra," which is true. Then he said, "Oh, silly me, of course. Your birthday is the 10th of October. That's on a Friday this year, you know." The 10th of October is indeed my birthday. I didn't say a damn thing for about 10 seconds. He only knew my first name and that I'm a Libra. This was about 2 minutes into the call. I struggled with wanting to hang up on him or ask him more questions about my future. I was pretty freaked out. When I was about 14, my mother worked at a small hospital as a registered nurse. Over the course of a few months, 6 or 7 hospital employees, the doctors and nurses, had loved ones either die or become seriously injured. One's daughter was killed in a car accident, another's husband abruptly died of pneumonia, and another's husband committed suicide. Nothing was happening to anyone who worked there, just people they knew. It seemed like every other day my mom would come home with some more grim news. She said people there got scared whenever the phone would ring, dreading the latest. It actually scared the hell out of me. I was worried something would happen to me. Thankfully, nothing ever did. My wife's mother passed away in 2003 from cancer. After the funeral, family and friends gathered at her house for a final celebration of her life. The gathering went late into the evening. My son, 3 at the time, needed to go to bed at that point. I walked with him up the stairs to where he would sleep. The room that my mother-in-law passed away in was upstairs and straight down the hallway as you reached the top of the landing. My son and I walked upstairs together, with me holding his hand. As we nearly reached the top of the stairs, my son stopped and wouldn't move, at the point which he could just see down the hallway. He was staring straight down the hall. I looked at him, then down the hall to an open doorway to a completely dark bedroom. He just stared and would not move any further. I asked him, "Buddy, are you okay?" His response was, "Daddy, the light. The light scares me." I looked again down the hallway where he was staring into the darkness. "Buddy, you see the light?" "Yes, Daddy. It scares me." I promptly picked him up and went back downstairs. To this day, the hairs still stand on the back of my neck when I think of it. When I was about 6, I used to sleep in my parents' room with my bed next to theirs. Our home is a single story, and in our room the windows were on opposing sides in the corner. I'd say it was just about midnight, my parents were long asleep and I was still trying to go to sleep. I looked at the right corner window to see the light that came from the auction place next door. Then I saw something walk into view. I could only see the shadow it made through our curtains' bedsheets. It was about 6 feet 6 inches, had a long slanted head, pointed ears, hooked nose, prominent brow, skinny arms with claws, roughly 4-inch long. It kept close to its body and was skeletally thin. It walked into view, paused for about 20 seconds, then kept walking on the ramp to the porch. I heard its footsteps. I was so terrified that I couldn't even move, but eventually gained the courage to pull my blankets over my face. I was at a friend's house around 12 years ago. We were in the basement watching TV, when his mom's boyfriend comes down the stairs and tells us to keep it down. We looked at each other, confused because we were literally just watching TV and it wasn't on high volume at all. We said we weren't being loud and he said, "You aren't yelling?" And we shook our heads. He just sort of does the look and tells us he and my friend's mom had heard someone screaming coming up from the furnace vents. So though it was coming from the basement where the furnace is, we didn't hear anything and were like 15 feet away from the furnace. Sadly, I can't verify the next story because I wasn't there, but my friend from the basement and another friend say they were upstairs in the kitchen one night hanging out, and they heard a scream, clear as day, coming out of one of the furnace vents. Freaked them out, naturally, but I never did get to hear it. Probably just metal creaking. But it was weird that we were so close to it and didn't hear anything that could be interpreted as a scream. GF and I are sleeping. She startles awake and says in an urgent tone, "Lemming. Lemming, are you okay?" I tell her I'm fine. She describes a bad dream where I was convulsing next to her. I tell her it was just a dream and we lay back down. About 2 minutes later, she flings up screaming bloody murder and flailing, shouting my name. Apparently, she went back to sleep right back into the dream. Basically had PTSD about it for a few months after. Spent about a month sleeping in different rooms because every time I shifted it freaked her out. Even when she was finally okay enough to sleep in the same bed, I had to try to remain perfectly still, and any movement had to be careful and deliberate. About a month ago, I was flying down to Texas to visit a close friend, and it was about 8:30, so it was dusk. The sun was shining inside the plane, so most everyone had the sliding blinds down. Anyway, out of nowhere I had the urge to look out the window, so go ahead and do so. Immediately, I looked down to see the view, and out of nowhere, probably 400 to 500 feet below the plane, a small jet/missile-looking object flies by extremely fast. It was man-made because it had decals and was jet black, but it lacked wings and barely looked large enough to hold a single person. It flew in the opposite direction of the plane, and I saw the jet stream it left behind longer than I saw the actual object. I remember saying, "Whoa," and looking around to see if anyone saw the same thing I did, to no avail. Still have no idea what I saw. It's not exactly creepy, but extremely strange and a little unsettling. Happened last night, actually. I have two parakeets, and at night, I keep their cage covered to keep them warm and block the light out so they can sleep better. They're usually quiet and sleep peacefully through the night. Except for last night. It was around midnight, and all of a sudden they started freaking out and flying around the cage, obviously spooked by something. I quickly uncovered the cage so they could see, and they eventually calmed down and settled on their perch again. It reminded me of all those ghost movies I've seen where animals can see/sense demons and humans can't. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for this, like maybe one of them moved in their sleep and startled the other one, but I don't know. It was definitely unsettling because they never usually do this. May not be creepy to you, but this terrified me at the time. When I was about 12 or 13, both my parents worked, as they still do. At that time, I'd have the house to myself until 3:30 in the afternoon. We didn't have a landline at the time, only cell phones. For maybe a month or two, here and there, I'd hear a ringing noise for a few minutes at a time. It sounded a lot like a landline, and bear in mind that our closest neighbor was about half a mile away. The creepiest account of this happening was around 1 to 3 in the morning. I had just laid down to go to bed, and it rang. It sounded like it was right inside my room, right by my head. As far as I know, it didn't stop until I fell asleep, and that was the last time I can remember it happening. I have a brother 2 years older than me, let's call him John. My parents told me that when he was a few months old, every night at 2/3 a.m., John would wake up and point at the ceiling and start crying and screaming. This wouldn't stop till he was 1.5 years old, when he was moved into my grandmother's room. She was staying with us to look after him. Anyway, while the problem seemed to go away, it came back when I was born, and my parents put me in the same spot where my brother used to sleep. From what my mother told me, I would do the same thing John did, scream and cry while pointing to the same spot. My dad decided to call in a priest to bless the house, and the problem seemed to stop. We moved out of the house a few years later, and even now, I get the chills just thinking about it. I travel weekly for work and had been staying near Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. During a week this July, my suite didn't seem out of the ordinary. Monday, no problem. Tuesday morning, somehow the bathroom door locked and closed itself during the night, and I couldn't get in. Had to call the engineers to open it. I thought it was strange, but whatever. Tuesday night/Wednesday morning, I dreamt that the bathroom faucet was running. I woke up hearing my faucet running full blast. No one was in my room, and I certainly didn't turn it on. The faucet had separate hot/cold handles, and it took a little force to turn the water on. I looked at the time, and it was 3:15 a.m. I then turned all the lights on and waited till 8 a.m. to check out. I should have asked for another room right then. Maybe 10 years ago, when Zanga was a thing, I'd be on the computer at my grandparents' house. They own an old Victorian house, and the front of the house has 3 living rooms in the shape of an upside-down L and a foyer to connect the 2 corner living rooms. The computer is in the middle room. I usually shut the doors to the front one because the house is huge. I hated seeing things out of the corner of my eyes, which I felt I did a lot more at a younger age than I do now when I'm here. Anyway, doors shut. I hear something banging on the window of that room. There is a front door in the room that I was in with a wraparound porch to the other side of the front room, so I walk out. Nothing is there. Go back inside, more computer games, blah blah. The doors start moving as if someone is trying to open it. I was home alone.